Hello, friends. Thank you for coming to our panel. My name is Connor McGill. I'm the director for Pixera USA, and very gratefully a Framework board member. And as part of our sponsorship, we're given a place on the speaking schedule, but nobody wants to hear from me. So I invited some friends who are practitioners and technologists to discuss a topic that I'm even more convinced is germane after listening to so many talks on the subject, which is content management for large-scale visual experiences. So I'm just going to frame up a little bit about the panel, and then I'm going to let them contribute. So content management, borrowing Laura's description or definition, getting the pixels where they need to be, when they need to be there. You know, we all know that that's a huge team effort. And large-scale visual experiences being high-res, high-fidelity display systems for information or entertainment. And everyone here has pretty significant or extensive experience doing those things. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and then I'll ask them some questions to get the conversation going.
Hi, my name is Scott Miller, working for MDLR Technologies, my little outfit. I've background all things technology. Recently, last sort of 2 years, I have spent a lot of IT and workflow support for content companies and a lot of production support for putting shows together, and yeah, generally moving hundreds of terabytes of large files around for very large format screens. So this is a very apt talk, as it's been my life for the last 2 years. We'll play past the parsage.
Hi, I'm Florian Mosley, and I've been a media server guy for roughly 20 years, and I've had to experience the joys of content management often. Nowadays, I do a lot of custom solutions development, and a lot of that tends to extend into pipeline and workflow development as well.
Hello, my name is Sam Slade, and I'm with Astra Production Group, and we're just a small collective of programmers and integrators and system designers out of Los Angeles, and I tend to work on a lot of our special projects, which is like a regular project, but with a lot of side quests that are not optional.
Hi, Philip Galler with Seismic, previously Lux Machina, background in usually strategic leadership and vision for very large projects all across the globe. So excited to be here.
Excellent. Well, Phil, I will start with you and ask, what makes content management for large-scale visual experiences such a difficult problem?
Yeah, scale, for sure. I think not just scale in the deliverables, but the variety of deliverables and where they're going. Oftentimes on a large show, you might be delivering for 20 different screens, 20 different pixel aspect ratios, 20 different pixel densities, all of which have to be uniform. You might be also deploying to a video game. You might be deploying to an immersive experience. You might be deploying to an advertising campaign all at the same time. But also the scale of the number of, the larger the project, the more cooks in the kitchen. And so dealing with all of those people and keeping them all both in line, but also enabling them to have a voice and feel like their voice is being heard, even if at the end of the day, like you're up against physics. And I think that is one of the probably two of the hardest challenges is that we have.
And Sam, as a show control programmer and media server operator, what makes it really important that content management is well thought out and well executed?
Yeah, of course. Well, so I can talk a little bit to my experience before live pixels and playback. Is I was at a traditional production company, and the biggest thing they taught us was like you have to have a really strong file system and like a really strong organizational system. And when I first joined the company, they like on orientation day they sat us down and they're like, there's 3 things that a good content management system needs to do. Is it needs to make sense to you right now. You should never have to look for a file. You should just go to the location where it is, which sounds a lot easier than it actually is. And the second part of that is that has to work for anyone who walks in the door, right? Any editor, any producer, someone who may not be tech literate or may not learn a new software well has to be able to walk in and be able to like understand the structure that we've created. And then the third part is making both of those things happen 3-5 years down the line when someone else is opening this project for the first time or reworking it, and preparing that project or creating this project in a way to be ready for the people who will come after us, and making sure that it's accessible. And I think it puts you in the right mindset when you're creating a project like that in the beginning of keeping really well organized. And that's kind of like my little call to action is like, do whatever you can to make it easier for the next person who will come after you.
What are some ways that projects or project teams commonly fail to properly manage their content?
I get to say bad things about projects.
I think that's the point of the whole panel.
So I think that I was actually thinking about this as Sam was just talking, because the idea of permanent sanity for information like metadata that regrettably we usually have to embed in things like the file name, where they can get mangled as part of data entry errors as they get passed from one person to another. We don't necessarily, for most shows, I think, care quite so much about stuff being available 3 or 4 years later, but we have sort of instead of time, we have a distance challenge, which is that a file that arrives at the place where it's supposed to get used has passed through several different hands, and the further you get removed from the source, the less information has managed to travel along with it that is germane in sort of the way that I think Sam is talking about to the way it's supposed to get used. So we wind up trying to solve for that by adding all these sort of underscore separated fields to. I was really intrigued actually at Scott's talk yesterday to see that.
What talk?
To see that someone had to add an additional field of metadata to the file names for a very application-specific issue that he was dealing with in the course of his project that didn't happen.
And Scott, what are some important lessons that you've learned through working with really large-scale live events like Coachella, for example?
Coachella or other things.
Yes.
No, just before I answer that question, there's a general point which I think is something for the room, which I'm really interested in is, if we go back 15 years ago, if someone was doing a piece of content, you were using C4D, After Effects, Windows File Explorer, Mac or whatever, and you were outputting your content on a screen. And you could do that on a laptop or a computer, and it was, a slower computer back then, so it was still a challenge. But the crazy thing that we have now is 15 years on or whatever, we're still essentially doing exactly the same process. And also, I think another big frustration in our industry is that people are now 15 years into doing exactly the same thing for 15 years. The one thing that has changed fundamentally in 15 years is the pixel pitch of screens. And so all of a sudden, we're 15 years down the line, still trying to do the same workflows, but all of a sudden, a file used to be, a gigabyte video file 15 years ago would have been a humongous piece of content. There's shows I've worked on recently where a single frame of video is 1 gigabyte. And the struggle is, unfortunately, is that we have this horrible grind in our industry of always, that's how we did it last year. That's how we did it last year. We're not going to change. I don't want to change, blah, 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 blah. That's what's killing us at the moment. And there's been a couple of shows I've worked on recently where, it was only maybe 3, 4K screens, 3, 4, 4K screens. And you have 4 artists turning up with 4 laptops expecting to render for these screens. And you have producers that are expecting these renders to arrive instantaneously. So I think one of the big things, one of the big challenges, one of the big things we have in this world is how do we start to change that? How do we educate our producers and our clients and go like, this is harder now. Yes, we can still do the same workflow, but we need to add little bits into it, and we need to add stuff onto it, and we need to start as an industry educating people. Because if all of us in this room say, hey, producer, it's going to cost you $2,000 a month for some online storage for this job, then eventually all the agencies are going to be expecting that as a budget. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that I've seen with content. Yeah, it's this concept of like the LED pixel pitch is getting higher and higher and higher and higher, but our workflows aren't adapting to it. On the Coachella thing, to finally answer your question, people know I like to talk. Yeah, the Coachella thing was actually a really interesting one. Last year we did Coachella, and I don't think it was the first time, but it was one of the first times that Touch Designer was used on the main stage in Coachella. Everyone thought I was crazy. I thought I was crazy. I didn't breathe for an hour, but it was a full real-time show. It had some bits of video content in it, but it was a full real-time show. And I think there's a whole other conversation as part of this of like, if we can't move files around, just create the pixels in real time. But that's a whole other conversation. Anyway, I'll shut up now.
A real-time project is there's still a tremendous amount of file management that has to go into it. Right.
He also gets AWS credits every time he gets you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? We go from how big are the individual files to how big is the bandwidth of the network that we have available to us. And I think, especially as we look at 2110 and a couple other variants of video over IP, like it is such a massive struggle to explain to people why all of a sudden they need to get enterprise-grade network equipment instead of like what they used to get, which is a throw-down Netgear switch that they got in Best Buy for $35, and now they're buying $60,000 switches, and you're like, yeah, you need 4 of those, and that'll get us like halfway, and then don't worry about your backups because we can't afford that anyways. Yeah, it's really interesting, right? It is actually a paradigm shift, and I think what's really interesting is not only are we as an industry very resistant to change, we also haven't adopted this thing that I think is super important, which is you go to every other, we talked a little bit about this the other day, so I'll keep it short, but every other major industry has like network engineers that they hire, and we kind of go, oh no, we'll just brush that under the rug. And the reality is like, we need to be hiring network engineers on some of these shows. Like when you're dealing with a massive real-time render cluster, 20, 30, 40, 50 machines, dual quad GPU, all of a sudden you're a little OpenAI, right? And like OpenAI only exists because they have 100,000, probably not 100,000, thousands of network engineers, right? And I think that needs to be a change we need to make as well as figuring out how we deal with the storage of the resulting files that come out of that. So, yeah.
And Sam, what is it about the job site that makes it so difficult to just turn this into a software problem and just run everything on a network, other than money?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Well, and I mean, at least right now, like our local storage is faster, and like that is the problem is we're kind of chasing ourselves. Is like we're pushing more pixels, we're pushing more data, and our networks are getting faster. But will there be a point where the network speed catches up to the pixels that we're trying to drive? And I'm not sure. I think at least right now there is an inherent inefficiency of doing this, because whenever I receive, at least for most of the projects I do, when I receive content, it's not broken up or distributed for the systems individually that are going to play the content. It's like the cohesive surface. So if you have multiple systems that are all playing back the same piece of content, it's duplicated across all those systems. While in an IP or streaming network, that is a problem we don't have to worry about. That same stream can go to all the machines at the same time. And then what you were saying about the site itself, you are under certain requirements based on the client and based on the requirements of that site, whether that data can be hosted locally on site or whether it can be in the cloud or whether it has to be, air-gapped from anything else on the network. Things like that can be a huge problem.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think a lot of ideas are sort of getting mixed in ways that perhaps they shouldn't. I think that part of the challenge for on-site better infrastructure for servicing better network throughput is that some people still don't understand that there's a difference between an $8,000 switch and a $60 switch. And I think like network infrastructure is often sort of perceived as this general purpose thing, the internet comes out of it. Whereas the 2110 Mellanox technology comes out of stuff like InfiniBand, which was designed to share memory across server clusters. And the two applications, internet for one or PCI on the wire, are completely different things. But conceptually, we see something that looks like the same plug, so we think it's sort of the same thing. I don't know if we're going to get to SATA disk speeds on the network. I mean, maybe someday, but odds are at that point we'll have even faster. We'll be down to looking at like the PCI Express speeds locally. I don't know if that's too nerdy.
No.
I think it's a like the problem with our industry is that we have this concept that the show must go on, and so I don't think we're going to actually change. Every show kind of happens, even though it's a nightmare and everyone's working, 26 hours a day to make it happen. The show still happens and everyone walks away. It's like, oh, that was fantastic. We don't need to change anything for next year. Oh, by the way, we want twice as much content and twice as many layers and twice as much screens. And I think it's my big thought for all of this is like, what's going to be the catalyst that's going to actually get people to change? Do we have to have a big show that fails? Do we have to have something go wrong? Like, what is the catalyst that's actually going to make people realize that we need better networking, better storage, better connectivity? You can go to some sites and they'll give you 10 megabit internet and then go like, is this fast enough? And you're like, well, it's fast enough for me to send you an email to tell you the content's not ready, but it's not, that's all that's going to happen. And then you're going to come up with a USB 3 hard drive that has 3 files on it out of 100. So yeah, so I without going, I can talk endlessly about servers and storage and NASes and 100 gig networking that never actually transfers files at 100 gigs. And like, it's a whole new level. And I think it's a really interesting time for our industry. It's like, where is this paradigm shift going to happen? Where's the 2110 going to come in? Where we're going to have virtual machines? Are machines going to be on site in 5 years' time? Or are we going to be plugged into a fiber port on the wall? What is content going to be? Is it AI? Like, do we just, instead of real time, we just generate gibberish in 5 seconds? So I think, that's, I'm just trying to sort of put out thoughts and sort of, get reactions from the crowd of like trying to think like, how do we as an industry push these problems forward?
Well, I was just going to say in response to you, like, we're sitting in a room of some really, really talented people, and like, I think that has prevented us from, it's prevented shows from failing, right? We know how to fix problems, we know how to solve things, and I'm sure that has like, in a weird way, set us back a little bit because we have been able to figure out solutions, whether it's ideal or not, or whether it's like, future forward or future proof, which is not. But
we could be our own worst enemies. Yeah, we could be our own worst enemies at solving all the problems for the clients because they're really fun problems to solve, and then we end up shooting ourselves in the foot because they expect the job to be cheaper next time.
Yeah, actually, this reminds me of something Phil said in a conversation about scale, but brought us some interesting parallels to other industries that maybe are kind of this problem.
Exactly, and I think actually you both bring up really interesting points about we are sometimes our own worst enemy. Part of my adventure is to make products for people and leverage which is super exciting with everything, of course, Connor, you guys are doing. For me, I think it's really interesting to look at this paradigm of where things cross over, right? Like, everyone in the world is making a digital asset, and the anecdote I think I probably used was I went to the dentist the other day, and they 3D scanned my mouth, right? They put up, like, basically got my mouth photogrammetry, and it was, like, not a nice dentist. It was, sorry, guys. One day I'll know how to talk at a panel. They 3D scanned the inside of my mouth, right? Like, so now my mom and pop dentist, who is not a high-end dentist by any means, is creating a digital asset just like any one of the artists working at any of our shows. Architects, engineers, medical, 360 MRIs, pretty much every interior designer in the entire world, my realtor, you name it, is having to create 3D assets. They're using drone technology, they're using LiDAR, they're using photogrammetry, very much like the people in this room, right? And, when I look at products, my entire user base for a product that I would make for the media and entertainment space is sitting in this room, right? So there's, 100 of you, 200 of you, just phenomenal, but it's never gonna let me make a product at scale. And so I've gotta look at where is that crossover if I'm gonna make something at scale. And the crossover is at the intersection of creating a digital asset, right? Everyone makes a new file every single day. You sit in your computer, someone used this example the other day, and not having kids, I can't resonate, but they had a kid, and their kid was doing a play, and they had to make like the program for their play, so they went into they went into Photoshop, and they were Photoshopping some clip art together, but like someone has to manage that, someone's got to control it, someone's got to have a custody chain around it, and then how do we review and approve it, and of course, how do we actually make that play happen, right? But if we can, I think as an industry, solve some of this resistance problem that we have by actually looking at other micro industries or either other very large industries that are actually doing very similar stuff, I don't think I didn't share this, but one of the things that I recently learned is that there's a very large shoe brand that just hired 2,000 real-time visual effects artists, which is more visual effects artists than work in real time in most of the major visual effects companies combined, right? So when a single shoe brand is able to do that, it's clear the tide is changing, and it's clear they're going to need tools too. So like, there's so much opportunity, I think, for this crowd, but also for new tools that enable us to allow us very much to build products that'll work really well for media entertainment while being able to afford to keep those products alive and continue adding the features we need because we're doing it on the backs of the shoe brands, or the clothing brands. And to me, that's really exciting, I think, and it hopefully breaks the barrier of resistance a little bit.
Excellent. Anybody have any reactions?
No, just to touch on the point of the niche industry, I think it's one of the hardest struggles that we have for every single, vendor that's sort of works in our industry, and every operator that works in our industry is like, how do you go and write code or sell a product in our industry that solves a problem? Everyone in this room could fire up Cursor AI right now and make a content management system and then be like, yay, does anyone want to buy it? We'll go, no, because we can build it ourselves, because we're all a bit egotistical in that way. And I think, that's the niche industry aspect is a real hard one to solve for us. And I fear that's probably why we haven't got a solution for it yet, because we're all and it's a niche industry, and then we're even tiny little islands. We're all freelancers. Like, I work for myself with a bunch of people in this room, but like, it's a really interesting business. It's essentially a business problem. I don't think it's a technical problem that we have here. We know we can share content on networks. It fundamentally comes down to a business problem. How do we solve that? Is it up to the vendors to solve? Is it up to us to solve? And it's also like a problem that sits across so many aspects of a job.
I was going to give actually a specific shout out to a product that is not normally from our space, but I've used before, and I used it on a job recently. It's actually really helpful. It's called Shotput Pro. It's like a DIT software for Mac and Windows, not sponsored, just giving them a shout out. It's like $160, and you can make these really cool workflow trees of like, hey, I've ingested a piece of content, duplicate it to all these devices, transcode it, burn in time code, upload it to Massive or AWS or what's LucidLink, that's the other one that people are using now. And then it can give you like a PDF report of every single file you ingested, whether it passed checksum or not. And it's like, that industry is incredibly tiny, and I'm surprised they're still around, honestly, but I'm glad that they are. And yeah, I think it's like we sometimes will have to harvest products and workflows from other industries, or maybe tell them, hey, can you adapt this to work for something for our industry as well, and sort of combine a few smaller subsets into a single product.
Yeah, like we almost need the next framework. We need to have a VFX thing at the same time, and we need to all go to each other's talks, because it's crazy when you go and chat to VFX companies and you see they're like, oh, well, we've solved all these problems, and then they look at us and we're like, oh, we've solved all those problems, like we can do all this, and you're like, oh, why didn't we just talk earlier? But yeah, it is, we find with Laura's in here, we just need a VFX aspect to so just how do we get this cross-pollination? Because we are just talking to our peers here, that we're all sharing the same problems.
One of the things I learned at SIGGRAPH many years ago was that Autodesk, Adobe were only able to ever afford to do SIGGRAPH because of all of the other industries that they were servicing. The visual effects industry had the highest requirement for fidelity, and because everyone else became below that, if they could hit the squeaky wheel fidelity, they could afford to do it on the back of the AEC industry, the medical industry, and et cetera. I mean, like, you look at Gensler, Bechtel alone, ARC, I believe, combined larger than the revenue of most of the media entertainment industry, sans gaming, right? And like, if we can hit that fidelity, all of a sudden, you open up this whole world of other ways to afford to do these things. But I think that's really interesting what you said, Sam, which is there are these really awesome individual products made by probably very small teams of people, right? They're super affordable that if we could discover, and like I would love a list of them. One of the things I love to do, it's a hobby, is occasionally go to the Academy Software Foundation website. If you guys haven't ever checked it out, there are some incredibly free, incredibly powerful, also free, open source, occasionally tools on that website like Res, which is a workflow tool. It's completely free, similar to what you mentioned, that you have to do a little bit of your own legwork, but like I recommend everyone go check that out, because that's how they stay afloat, is the more people that use that and the more people are involved in those visual effects conferences, the better off we all are. So I just wanted to share that.
Excellent. Go ahead, Florian.
So you mentioned something earlier that I think I've thought about very often, and that is that it would be great if we started staffing network personnel to support sites and shows, because usually that's one, and to your point about us being our own worst enemies, that's a responsibility that just tends to fall to whoever happens to feel like they're sort of okay at doing that stuff. And the more that we become dependent on network infrastructure to solve like all the various aspects of show control and like content management and so forth, I think that it ought to be a fairly no-brainer sort of position to have someone have a dedicated full-time job. While you're here, you need to solve all the network problems, and they can have aggregate hit lists for resolving transfer speeds and like communications issues on like, you know, the ACN network or what have you. The other thing is about these sort of products and like external tools. I think something, and I mentioned this on the call, the metadata analysis that servers do for things like version control or frame patching and stuff like that, they're all sort of very locally implemented by each vendor, and that's great. But it would be great if there was an external framework that allowed us to wrangle metadata and versioning completely independent of servers. And I mean, it's not, this is more just complaining than necessarily a solution, but when we talk about people just in the end sneaker netting USB drives, like from point A to point B, my mind boggles a little bit imagining how much time gets lost with just the sheer number of copies involved in there, because the conceptually copying things via like a Thunderbolt 3 cable is quicker, but when you're doing that copy 3, 4, 5 times, one really has to wonder how much time winds up getting saved.
Go for it.
Yeah, well, I was just gonna drop off that point and just be like, where I wish everyone in the audience had a microphone so we can talk back. But like, I'll ask the panel as they do. But like, where do we put automation versus manual processes in all of this? This is something I've been thinking about a lot recently. Like, do you try and automate the hell out of this, or do you keep it manual? You saw those tags that we've started adding into the end of file names. That was for a sort of file cutting up system, slicing maybe. The argument I suppose against automation is that how do we then standardize it? How do you make it so that everyone's doing it? It's the same thing as you just pointed out. Like, is Pixera different from Disguise and different from all the other servers in terms of things? Yeah, we get into this horrible world of, oh, there's 14 standards. Let's make one standard to rule them all. Oh, now there's 15 standards. So I think the automation thing for me is I think what it sounds like in this conversation is there needs to be a step change in the industry of who needs to be involved in a project to make it work. And like, do we need to have network engineers? And do you have to have a coder on site? I know some operators now that will be on a job site. They don't touch Disguise or media servers. They're just there writing software to fix these solutions. I've just started talking and lost my chain of thought a bit, but yeah. So yeah, the manual versus automated process is a big one for me. The manual, good, everyone checks it. It's a job. Someone says looking at the file. Automation, it can happen overnight while everyone's asleep, and it doesn't slow things down. It's an interesting.
Yeah, I'm big, so I think good software, right, is based on a couple of things, which I see as like intelligent development is around good breakpoints, knowing where you're going to have a problem, dealing with those problems, unit testing, like QC processes, and the ability to manage that pipeline, but also get the data out, but not just get the data, use the data in an intelligent way, right? If you can have all the data in the world, but if you can't analyze it, understand it, it's meaningless. I view automation the same way. We should be automating everything, but only when we have the tools to analyze the results, the breakpoints to reach in and actually stop the automation process and become a manual process, right? Because we're going to run into edge cases, and we can't predict every edge case. And so I think automation is a necessity when viewed through the lens of it is a product unto itself that needs to be entirely managed through the data, the intelligence of the data, and the people that understand how to use that intelligent data. So I'm pro automation, but with controls.
I think my response to that would be I run into a lot of projects where either it's maybe not a budgetary thing, but just a like thought process and like planning from the beginning where like I do a Pixera project and it's a copy paste from site to site, like corporate office thing. And the content drive is just two 14 terabyte spinning drives in a network attached storage. And like I need to transfer 10 terabytes of content across 12 different servers. And like, I don't want to waste 3 days waiting for that to happen. So I have like 6 individual drives that I've just made over time of like a copy of every single server's like RX cache, and it's like files that needs to play. And I go plug them in every single time I get the site for the first time and manually copy everything over because it saves me like 3 days. And it would be very easy to make that a better system, but like I don't have control over that. Like I'm showing up and that's the system I have to work with. So it is sometimes limited by the available resources you have, and you sometimes just have to find a workaround for it.
It sounds like the solution might be some kind of like a framework arrived at Riot Act for all the things that are going to happen to you if you don't provide the proper resources for content management.
Well, we typically call those standards, right? And I guess I'm hearing that there's two fundamental problems. There's the substrate problem that we're currently working on, like legacy infrastructure that doesn't support all of the flexible application development that we want, and also there's a lack of standards. So I want to plug my colleague Bateman, who's working through USITT, the Digital Media Commission, to try to develop some standards for media delivery formats. And please talk to him after. But I do hope you'll indulge me in a question. When I started in this industry 15 years ago, I logged on to AMX University, and I was told, after having no exposure, that the AVIT convergence had arrived, and that with their JPEG their JPEG 2000 encoder, that my life would never be the same again. But yet here we are, 15 years later, still using, HDMI, SDI. Where do you think we really are in the transition? Because I think it's obvious to everybody in this room that the cloudification of our industry, all the way down to uncompressed, high fidelity, high resolution, high bit rate video delivery for super large screens, is better if you can do it over network infrastructure. But there's so many entrenched incentives from manufacturers, people just stuck in their ways, people who have been in their jobs for 40 years, and by God, I'm not going to learn a new thing. But do you think we are on the precipice of transforming, or what's the time scale for being able to get to this nirvana of, everything on the network, my applications are running in containers on some, cloud server somewhere?
I think the biggest challenge is that a chain of 1,000 links only needs one link to break for the whole chain to be completely useless. And I think the reason that we're still running with a computer server with a bunch of DisplayPort outputs on the back is because it's easy, and because there's a bunch of vendors who have them in stock, and they can roll them out and they can plug them in. And it's similar to the world of how virtual production and XR and all that stuff I was doing. And the hardest thing with virtual production was never the technology. The hardest bit with virtual production was the fact that every department, what they did affected everyone else in this kind of circular pattern. Everyone, when they did something, it affected something else, and you had to go around. And that was never, yes, they all worked together before, but they never had this really detrimental effect. If the camera guy wanted to change his white balance for a creative look, he didn't care about it, but now your set extension's wrong and everything else. So I think it's the same thing with moving to 2110 and these kind of remote servers and remote offsite. All of a sudden, you're taking people's individual responsibilities for their one bit of kit, so the E2 guy just has to worry about the signal coming in from the skies. All of a sudden, you're putting pressure on the producers, on the organizers. The venue is now part of the media delivery pipeline because you're using their fiber infrastructure and their internet. So all of a sudden, you're bringing everyone in, and I think that's the hardest challenge in all of this, is you have to then get people together, you have to educate them, you have to manage them, and you're only turning up on site 2 days before the show, and you've got to do all of that on top of the stuff that you already have to do to get ready. So yeah, technically, I don't think there's anything stopping us right now running video from the cloud to this LED screen for this presentation. So none of us have all of this stuff. I say, rarely in our industry is technology the barrier. It's unfortunately us and people and our horrible emotions that we all feel, and budgets and everything else. But yeah, it's the chain of 1,000 links and one link to break becomes so pivotal when we get into these more complex systems.
It's easy to design a system, and then if it works, you just keep using it over and over again. It's a lot easier that way.
Well, can I give my one little quick one phrase? My one favorite phrase that I'm just driving home, which is perfect for this. But yeah, it's really, at the moment, it's really easy to make stuff work. It's a lot of work to make it easy. And I think it's that flip that we haven't got to yet. We're still in the just hire lots of people, make them do their job, and that kind of, it'll work. But yeah, it's not going to flip the other way around anytime soon. Sorry.
I think people in our industry are, like, with the intersection of the technology and sort of engineering mindset and the arts, delight and appreciate a really well worked out system. I certainly do. And I think that, you know, when you talk about people 15 years ago saying that this cool confluence has arrived, I think that we see the value in a well-functioning, beautifully choreographed dance of data through the production. And I think what winds up undermining realizing and actually acquiring that is the profit motive. I think that while we continue to do the work that fills the gap between actually existing within that beautifully choreographed environment with struggle and horrible emotions, I think there is insufficient motive to maybe realize it, is what I'd say. So, I mean, I think that we could theoretically be there. We're not, because it's cheaper to not be there a lot of the time.
In the short
term. Yeah, I mean, I think you guys touched on a lot of these points. Is it's like everyone's very comfortable with the current systems and infrastructure that we use, and you know, I feel like you're less scared to go into a project with something you've already done and you know is tried and tested, even if it's not the right solution, maybe, or not the most efficient one. I think it's like a comfort thing, and people will like fall back onto that.
I think the other crazy thing is that there is a lot of shows now being run off a laptop and Resolume, and even Disguise now has their X1, and Pixera can be run off a laptop as well. Like, the fact that we can go and run a big show off a, you know, $3,000 Razer laptop with a 5090 doesn't exactly kind of drive the whole, like, oh, let's run this from a massive AWS infrastructure. The cost savings are almost going the other way. It's the same with YouTube. Like,
what's the nick on that Razer laptop?
You plug a Thunderbolt 4 in, and you've got, you know, you're going straight to screen. But there's big pop shows that are running a laptop straight to screens. It's
on Pixera.
Yeah,
if it works, it works.
Or Touch Designer. But yeah, so I think it's the same. I find it's the same question that the big TV companies are having as well. It's probably why a lot of them haven't moved to, you know, ESPN is still 720p, and you're like, you know, they probably go, well, why would we do 4K? Is that going to get us more viewers? Is that going to actually solve this problem? I watch more YouTube video, and some of the YouTube videos I watch now, like if I watch Haggerty car videos, are better produced than some of the Top Gear videos that was full TV. And we're digging our own hole by making our own lives easier, running these shows to then try and get to this like crazy nirvana. And it flips as soon as you have more than a laptop, and then all of a sudden it's this crazy problem where you need content management. But we're making our lives easy. We, as in the larger industry, are making our lives easier when a pop star can say, "Hey, I want to do a big show. I've got 3 4K screens," and a VJ can rock up with a Resolume laptop, whereas, you know, for 3-4 years ago, that had to be a Disguise or Pixera or Touch Designer server to run your show. That's, I think, how it's just globally easier now to put on a video show.
Okay. So we are running into the Q&A time, I think. So yeah, but you could have a point.
Don't worry, I'll talk eventually.
Hi, guys. I've delivered content to all 4 of you at different times, not Connor yet. on each one
Thank
of different
God.
media, like, see,
Wouldn't know what to do with that.
Disguise, Coolux, Disguise at XR, and I think we did a broadcast show on Disguise as well, all to varying degrees of like organization and management and hard drives over a fence at the Grammys and stuff like that. So just curious, as you're going into all of this, on the front end, how much are you guys seeing the role of the on-site team executing back to communicate more with the people actually making the stuff? Because at the end of the day, like, there's a responsibility for someone making the art on screen to understand all of this, but that bar is getting quite high, especially in like the film world. Like asking someone from Marvel to understand this guy's Pixera stuff is an interesting thing, you know. So just curious on the balance.
So I'm a firm believer the thing we can do as a group, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier today in a conversation, is virtual production, screens producer, whatever you want to call it, right? And so whether they're, however it is working, when you hire a production designer, you're hiring the person who's going to deal with the Media Fear show, and they are advising on that entire tech stack. And what I think is actually the most interesting about the business evolution of what's happened here, a bunch of us have been at places that are no longer, and the people who I think were inside the business are taking up senior leadership roles in places like Marvel, Netflix, Sony, and we're starting to see that tide turn, right? Like something that had never happened to me before, got the very first call from an executive producer who we all was on last year. I was the second phone call, and it's because, hey, this is going to be a technically complex show, and I need someone on my side. Wouldn't have happened 12 years ago, 10 years ago, Lux, because it wouldn't have been a possibility. And like all of a sudden, I content for the entire show, how it's going to work, and not from day 100, but from I think. Sorry.
So one of the things that your question, JT, made me think about is also the value of review, because a lot of time, especially in quickly moving shows, people that are producing the content they get it out and it goes to the media server guy, and then a problem is discovered there, and that chain of like review and feedback is something like my beautiful vision, and we've all talked amongst ourselves about this, was the idea of sort of a lofty database that all like media servers plug into that connects directly to the place where content producers check their content into, and a sort of great unified signaling chain where the current latest version of the asset is pulled by a URL into the system, and if the media server operator finds a problem with it, right there they can document what the issues are and report back, and that immediately pops up on like the editor's desk where they can immediately start routing it. And I think a lot of time winds up getting lost, not just in the sneakernet stuff, but just in the communications chain and like problems getting misidentified and so forth.
I was going to wrap JT's question up with one point. I'm keen to push forward, so it's just pure me. On JT's point, I think again, part of this sort of whole, we've made this a bit easier. My big thing is we need to move the operators into the creative world. I think there's a world where the operators should not be with the vendor. The operators are part of the creative team, and they should be with the creative team and working with the creative team. And I think that shift is a big part of that workflow in general. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say that some of those complicated shows that I've done were only possible because the content people were sitting next to me on their MacBooks, and I was looking at their screen, and they would turn to me and say, hey, should I do it this way or this way? Even if they were in a different room, like still on site, we wouldn't have had that line of communication that you just have sitting next to that person. And like, as they feed you content, you can just immediately put it in and check stuff and tell them, okay, this worked or this didn't work, or we need to change this. And I know that that's not always possible, but yeah, opening up lines of communication and familiarity too with the content team, and knowing what they are and are not familiar with and what things they may not have encountered in the past.
You guys provided quite a lot of experience across the board, and sharing your insight is really helpful for everybody in this room. Scott, you've mentioned something about Resolume taking in the industry and it's making things simpler. I, for one, have seen how powerful it can deliver. Where do you guys, and I want to know where you guys all think, each one of you actually, where do you think where the next evolution is going to be for something like content management? Where is it the next step where we change codecs, or is there something that's fundamentally changing on how media servers reads content or handles content? Because everyone in Pixera, Disguise, Resolute, they all handle content differently. Vertex has something really awesome as well they've developed, but like all of these things are changing. Where do we see the next evolution for all of these things across the board? Or is it something as simple as let's change the way we handle codecs? Maybe it's helped solve how much large data we have to ingest. So I want to know what you guys think and where the next step is going to be.
I'll start off and go down the line. Yeah, so I think my thought on it, the next thing is, I do think we're going to end up in this world where we're going to have big sort of cloud, lots of servers in the cloud, and whether that's real time or whether that's feeding pre-rendered video, you know, the biggest video distribution system, I think, I may be wrong, but I think probably the biggest video distribution system is probably YouTube. And there's probably quite a lot of technology that they have behind the scenes that we can leverage in our industry. So I think there's, yeah, the real time, I don't think real time is a solution yet until we have a GPU in the back of every tile. We're just not, 16 milliseconds is not enough time to make a piece of beautiful content. So I think real time has a place in it, but I do think this world of moving away from just having stacks and stacks and stacks of 4U boxes in a rack, taking some of this technology from maybe we have virtualized on site to have smaller machines. Hive is almost kind of going into this world. So I think there's the first step we have to do is step away from where we are now. But yeah, I do think, I can't imagine a day, there's not going to be a day where you just plug a fiber into a stadium and the bunch of servers are all hanging out in the background in a data center somewhere just feeding a bunch of video into the machine. And at that point in time, you can have 600 GPUs for a 2-hour show, and then you switch them off afterwards, and you've got an incredible show.
Yeah, it's software defined, right? Like the whole thing's software defined. It's in the cloud, and you're gonna rehearse your show with 600 GPUs. You're gonna run some DLS model against it or some language model against it, and you're gonna end up with something that runs on a laptop, and that's how you're gonna tour.
I'm not gonna pretend to have an encyclopedic understanding of all the cool technologies that might shape where we're heading, but I guess like from a purely managing video as a data problem standpoint, I think that what would make sense is that you decouple decoding from the media server that is maybe immediately to screens. The problem I see with real time as a potential endpoint solution is that it seems to mostly overlook the question of acquired footage, which is a thing that we're still going to need to want to play back, and it's a lovely thing that I don't think we want to throw out. The idea, though, I mean, and you've got, you had engineered these render clusters, and I could see a world where, maybe not in the cloud, we provide large, high availability storage for playback and decoding of footage, and then buffer that across the network to maybe less heavily performant GPU-laden boxes whose sole job is simply to acquire those textures, composite them to where they need to go within the frame of the production, and then present those that way. I think that playback, and I mean, it's a lot like a file server. Like you have a certain resource that's located someplace, and perhaps it's not even the whole large 16K frame, perhaps it's a sub-region, and creating specialized components that are responsible exclusively for seeking the section that we need to deliver to this particular box that's responsible for this particular portion of the display at that time is something that I think is actually quite achievable just with current network technologies. We're a little bit stuck, I think, in the notion of still believing that the best way of achieving that is by putting the most powerful CPUs and the most powerful GPUs and the most high availability storage in the box that is directly connected to the display head.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, there's just so many edge cases and so many situations that we run into. I think there's always gonna be projects that, like you said, are gonna maybe you can't use real-time generated footage, or you have to use a certain piece of media, and I don't know. I feel like the future is going to be like mixing all of these rendering pathways together. So some footage may be generated on site, some footage may be streamed in from an AWS server, and some is, maybe it can't live on that server and it has to come from some other on-prem site. I think it's going to be like the mixing of these rendering technologies that's going to make it the most flexible going forward.
Awesome. Thanks for the shout out, Connor. One thing that hasn't been talked about is, one thing I think everyone's run into is content security with a client. And when we start to pump all these things through the 1,000 chains that you're talking about, each one of those is another place where highly sensitive content can start straying from the path. How do you see kind of content security fitting into either the pipeline now or the Nirvana pipeline that Connor's talking about?
So I'm going to add one bit to this, which is also quantum rendering. We haven't talked about at all. And think about how many rays you can run in parallel at once on a single qubit. And that's definitely where we're headed, right? To me, you'll end up in some quantum territory. I think it's inevitable, right? That you've got a 600 node cluster and you've got a couple of quantum nodes that deal with encryption of everything that's leaving or going through, and they're basically future firewalls, and that's pretty much laying some type of encryption layer that I definitely am not qualified to talk about in any way, shape, or form. But on the other end, as a tour, you've got another one of those nodes that's doing decryption, and only you have access to that. I think chain of custody of the assets super difficult to manage. One of the things that I think we're working on is this idea that you'll be able to do cross-business collaboration, sort of like version control, but with Slack Connect, so that you can actually join your businesses together and do collaboration while still owning the IP and custody of your assets. But there's a tremendous number of challenges around that, and I'm really interested to hear what everyone else has to say, because I don't have a good answer, but I know it ends up at some point in quantum territory.
Yeah, I definitely have some projects that are very heavy in the security side, and you're not allowed to have footage or not allowed to have these clips outside of the site that you're working in, and it becomes very difficult because it's very easy to accidentally make a copy of these clips as it distributes to another server, or I took my RX cache and accidentally took an extra folder with me. I think it's near impossible to track where a file has been copied over. At least right now, there are no network-wide systems that can track the location of an asset as it moves through. And if you put it on a hard drive from another computer, at least not that I know of, and I think it would be an incredible thing to try and track without bogging down your playback system with a lot of software that would probably cause issues, either network-wise or processing-wise. So yeah, I think it's interesting, the chain of custody and who owns that file, and then who makes sure that only the people who should have that file have it. I think it's a hard thing to manage.
Oh, I just you guys mentioned earlier some tools, and I just wonder if you could reiterate what those tools were for those of us with terrible hearing.
I'll start off with one of the best tools I've used recently. Okay, I'll start off with the second best tool that I've used. No, we've been using a tool recently for some of our big shows called Suite Studios, very similar to LucidLink. This concept of a distributed file system. It's basically everyone has a USB drive plugged into their computer. As long as you have internet, you have access to the files. Some of our shows, we've had 300 terabytes of show files between artists and delivery and everything else, and it will saturate 10 gig internet. I haven't had faster internet to try anymore, but that's certainly been one of the best tools. I just quickly, for Michael's question, it seems silly that none of us, Phil, you might have the bandwidth to do this. Why are we not just attaching certificates to video files so that you have a encryption, and if you don't have the certificate or it's expired, you can't watch the video file? And you have that on the server or the processor level for all those pixels. So someone just go and invent that, and then we can solve that problem.
Yeah.
It does exist, but nobody cared for it. There's an encryption system in Pandora's box, but when it came out, nobody ever cared about it. It was a total mis-set-up feature.
And the reason that Pandora was able to do that was because they had their own proprietary MPEG. Yeah.
And it was doing exactly what you say. You need a dongle key, and you can play the video 5 times, and then it will dissolve.
If you want to learn something new, read an old book.
It's also conceivable, Michael. Sorry, I think Sam has answers for the tools, but it's conceivable to use a hash to generate some sort of like a GPU shader thing that you could insert in something like the notch decoder pipeline to potentially lock files out. The only way that I think you could centrally track them is if that was something that you had to check in online when you wanted to go and decode the file. To the question about tools, I think you had some about.
Yeah. The DIT software is called Shotput Pro. Shotput Pro. As of now, I don't think they can do transcoding of Notch LC, but I have written them an email. Because that'd be really, really cool. Another really cool one is Nobe Omniscope by this developer, Time and Pixels. It can take a spout output, and it can show vector scopes and any sort of like color, or I think it will also do audio and a bunch of other graphs. It's amazing. It's a super cool tool. I don't know if anyone else has some.
Yeah, lots of new ideas. No, actually, the really Res is something I would look at on the ASWF website, as it's a open source workflow tool for project management at scale for both render farms and delivery of assets, specifically for the visual effects space. But it's basically a pipeline TD in a box, and it's super cool.
Wes has decided to kill deadline. I'd love to know the answer for that.
Yeah, thank you all so much for a very invigorating discussion, and I think we can, give it up for our
Amazing. Round of
panelists.
applause for everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.